Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Early voting begins, the feds are investigating the Memphis Police Department, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists to talk about some of the biggest stories of recent days. Toby Sells is a reporter with the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you, Eric.
Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for being here. And Burnell Smith, publisher of the New Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here again.
Glad to be here.
So let's start with the investigation or review of the Memphis Police Department by the federal government, the Justice Department. I'm going to turn to you, Bill. It was requested by Mayor Strickland Rawlings. I mean, this was not, I think Ed Stanton was there, the local U.S. attorney. So it was not a specific, hey, there's a bunch of corruption, there's a bunch of terrible things going on, but it's a review that the feds have done in other cities about police practices and so on.
Right.
Fill us in.
When most people hear Justice Department review of a police department, they think the Civil Rights Division of it, which usually does involve a pattern of conduct or a specific incident. In this case, it's a different division of the Justice Department. It's a division called COPS, which is involved in community policing efforts, and it's a review that cities usually request because it's called a collaborative reform process. That being said, the chief in that section of the Justice Department said yesterday that usually these reports come to some pretty harsh conclusions about operations of police departments, and that it's pretty much a no-holds-barred look at two areas in particular: community policing and the use of deadly force by a police department. So both of those areas will be examined. The first of three reports will come out in about 6 to 8 months. So about next spring, we'll get our first idea of what the Justice Department is seeing in terms of how the Memphis Police Department operates on those two fronts and probably other fronts. And then we'll have a report in about a year's time from the start, and then at the end of it, after another year passes, in what is essentially about a 2-year process.
Right, and I'm reading from the Flyer story on this. I don't think you did. I think someone else at the Flyer did it. The program is reviewed, 14 other police departments across the country. In San Francisco, they released 94 findings and 272 recommendations after finding discriminatory policing practices against people of color. So again, it's not so much that they're investigating to indict, they're investigating to review best practices, things gone wrong. Your thoughts on it for now?
Well, it was interesting that Attorney Ed Stanton actually held a meeting later that day with a group of community leaders, probably about 40 people there at his office, to sort of begin a deeper conversation about what this really means and what it doesn't mean. And of course, they were very clear about this being requested, and it's not one of those sort of punitive things, but that some very, very normally, serious kinds of things come out of this. One of the key things that was mentioned, though, was these two listening meetings that will be held on the 29th and 30th of November. And that's where they first engaged the community. And one of the things that I think was admitted by everyone is that the grassroots community has to have buy-in in this thing very early on. Right. And know that there's some transparency as the results come out, because we're used to studies, whether it be a disparity study. And then the thing is, whether the recommendations that come out of it are actually implemented and funded.
Accountability and implementation, all that. I mean, I've already heard from some critics of the police department and the Mayor Strickland saying, look, yeah, it's good, they should be doing this, but it feels political. It feels like it's free, doesn't cost them any money, it looks good. I mean, it was a kind of very sort of negative response to this, that this is just political window dressing. Your thoughts, Toby?
The interesting thing to me yesterday when the news came out was that they had requested this well before the Black Lives Matter protest on the bridge. They said they did it well before that. They were talking with the Department of Justice for that, and I almost couldn't come at a better time, I think, after all that, to get some outside folks in here to look at it. I think it's really interesting. But then the other thing, the way that the news came out, we were saying it kind of could have been seen as a little scary. When we got the news advisory yesterday in our newsroom, you know, it was just like the federal government's been reviewing, and you know, we're going to announce something, and everybody was like, what could this possibly be, you know? So you call the mayor's office, and they're like, you know, put the brakes on. But there for a minute, it looked pretty scary.
Interesting thing is that they mentioned that 6 to 8 months ago they started this process to determine if the review, if the more extensive review should happen. And so they've essentially been here since Mayor Strickland's administration came into office, which is sort of an interesting thing. So he's sort of been proactive from day one.
Right.
I think that what is interesting here is that the police department is cooperating with it, and because the police department is cooperating in it, if there are critical findings, if there are criticisms, then the police department is pretty much going to be on the hook to do something about that. It's like we didn't come in here and go behind your back or not consult with you to come up with these findings. We talked with you. You cooperated in this, and these are the conclusions we come to. So it'll be interesting. Also, I think that this is interesting because this administration and a lot of other leaders in the criminal justice system that we've talked to around this table have been pretty adamant that what they're hearing from the public is that they want law and order. That the public wants a crackdown on violent crime and wants to stop the rise in that, which the rise of it has slowed to some degree. This is really the first time that you've heard our city leaders emphasize and say in a sustained way that we want to look at policies and procedures.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and we should move on, but it's interesting. We had Bill Gibbons and Harold Collins on the show recently. Bill Gibbons now, new president of the Memphis and Shelby County Crime Commission. You know, they've got Raymond Kelly, who's known for the stop and frisk policies in New York. He's now a consultant to the Crime Commission. You've got this sort of law and order campaign that Strickland ran on. And all of this is against the backdrop of a police department that lost hundreds of officers over a number of years. They're trying very hard to get back. They're at right under 2,000 officers, I think, right now, 1950 or so. They want to get back to 2,400. They're recruiting hard. They've introduced these new programs with Southwest and so on and so forth. Getting the high school kids and so on. So, you know, I don't have an answer. I just wonder what it's like to be a cop in the Memphis Police Department right now. Not necessarily the leadership, but just somebody saying, look, one more review, one more change, that much more pressure. And again, and we'll segue to the election, it's an interesting time for policing nationally. And as I said, the election is on. Early voting began, last week in Tennessee. We don't do a lot of national politics, but it is a big and really strange presidential election. So, you know, and it's been Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, has talked a lot about inner city violence and inner city, problems, and, the Democrats haven't done anything for him. So why don't they, it's time for African Americans to give him a chance. There's a lot of things he said, but since we were just talking about police and violence, your thoughts, Burnell, on this national election and how it plays out? Well, Tennessee's going to go Republican, almost certainly. It usually does. Memphis, not necessarily, but your sense of the conversation.
One is I think Trump's just broad generalizations about the African American community are at very best stereotypical, but. Certainly he's focused on sound bites and very little relative to true, policy and plans that have any real sense of being effective. But, one thing, he's been a master manipulator in some cases or user of media, which has been really, really interesting. I think it will change the way presidential elections and national elections are run going forward. But I think ultimately most pragmatic, smart people understand that, I think Clinton will win. And I think she'll win because she really brings to the table real, policies and plans that will take the country forward. And many of things that Trump has put on the table and has brought out, not only about our country, but the way the rest of the world perceives us, I think have been very interesting.
Well, you got Haslam, who never endorsed him, was always pretty skeptical of Trump, came out, in the last week or two, I lost my sense of time, and said he's going to write in for the first time ever, and that he will not vote for Trump. And so you've got this interesting, I don't know, Bill, if you want to take this, but it is interesting how Trump, if you look at Tennessee politics, the Republican Party in Tennessee is, I've said this analogy before, there's a great difference between Bill Haslam, lifetime Republican, kind of traditional, conservative, Christian, limited government, pro-business, Fred Smith, that kind of crowd, with a very radical, I shouldn't say radical, a very, an East Tennessee, Tea Party person who wants to burn the house down, burn the government down, it has no role. There's a major difference in that
Andy
party.
Holtz out there.
Yeah. So your thoughts on how this plays out and how this reflects Tennessee and Memphis politics?
Well, first of all, Tennessee's not anywhere near a battleground state. There are some states that weren't battleground states that are now in play as a result of the conduct of this election on both sides. Tennessee's not anywhere near a battleground state, and Tennessee will go for Trump, and Shelby County will be carried by Hillary Clinton. That said, I think that you have had this difference within the Republican Party for several elections now, with events like Mike Huckabee taking the Tennessee primary and Rick Santorum carrying the Tennessee Republican presidential primary after that, 2008 and 2012, while the Republican Party establishment in the state was behind John McCain and Mitt Romney in that order. So that's existed for some time before Donald Trump came along. Donald Trump, I think, has certainly accentuated that. So for me, the interesting moment for the Tennessee Republican Party will be after all the votes are counted and we see what kind of Senate we have, whether there's a Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate, and how Congress operates.
Yeah. Well, let's try to get more local. We are trying to have Haslam on sometime before the session starts in January, and so it would be interesting to get his post-election thoughts on this. Local stuff. Let's get a little more local.
Yeah, as Bill has reported very well over the weeks, just record-breaking local turnout for early voting out there. And Bill, the early voters have predicted the election in Shelby County for many presidential elections. Is that right?
Yeah. In presidential elections, unlike other elections, presidential general elections, the majority of the votes cast combined, Election Day and early voting, most of those votes come during the early voting period.
The sense from my editor, anyway, over at the Flyer, Bruce Van Weingarten, his column this week is that the turnout has been really big because a lot of Democrats really want to go out there and humiliate Donald Trump and see them go down like the Hindenburg, as he said. But that said, I was traveling across the state last week, and from Memphis to Chattanooga, and we were counting election stickers on the back of cars. It's not in any way scientific, but we counted 2 Trump stickers the entire 5-hour ride, and that was it. So it's an interesting election that way too. You're not really seeing outward signs.
So on the ballot, so I did early vote, and this year I was almost prepared. I always joke about this, that inevitably, and the people, we cover this stuff pretty closely. There's always something on there that I didn't know was going to be on there. There's always a judge's race or something really important that isn't on there. Some of the ones that were on, but actually I was prepared for this time, City of Memphis Home Charter Amendment, which is a really complicated. I'm looking at the language. I'm not going to read it, but it basically would redirect. You want to take this bill?
Sure.
Redirect MLG money from to the city. It wouldn't increase anyone's MLGW bill, but it would change the formula in which money is calculated and distributed to the city of Tennessee from
Memphis. Memphis Light, Gas, and Water pays what amount to property taxes to the City of Memphis government and to Shelby County government. They're called in lieu of tax payments, and they've been the subject of some pretty involved political disputes between the two governments about how much each of them are entitled to it. This is a charter amendment to the City of Memphis charter that would essentially benefit the City of Memphis in terms of in lieu of taxes that Light, Gas, and Water pays by about $5 million. That's $5 million in a balance toward Memphis that does not go to Shelby County government.
That doesn't go to Shelby County government?
Yes.
Okay. But it's only City of Memphis voters, or is it?
Yes.
How does that work? So the county residents don't get a say in this?
They do not. on this particular. It's a charter amendment.
That'll go over well.
Memphis, yes, and it has. There's been actually some litigation over this, which led to this particular charter.
Again, in the Brian Collins, and it's within the amendment. Brian Collins, Director of Finance for the city, says he estimates it'll be about $5 million gain to the city of Memphis. Shelby County Home Rule Charter Amendment. Shall the Shelby County Charter be amendment to require both the county mayor and county commission's approval to dismiss the county attorney from office? This sounds, kind of a little confusing. You got to be really inside baseball on this. Does anyone want to take it, or do I go to my friend Bill here?
Well, I wanted to mention something on that, on the MLGW piece I think was interesting is, recently that study came out that basically said that Memphians pay more, or at least poor Memphians pay more as a percentage of their annual income than any other place in the country. And I think, so when you look at some of the sentiments that people have about MLGW, there's not very good understanding about that particular ordinance. People could literally go in there and vote against it, which
and
would
just see MLGW,
right,
and
vote
$5 million
against it.
and assume that it's going to come out of further increase.
Further
in fees.
increase in there,
Right.
and I think that's a danger, and really not under, to your point about people not necessarily understanding what these ordinances are, having a lot of information about it.
Right.
Perception says, oh, MLGW, $5 million, my bill is going up. No.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So I think we got to be careful about that.
To the county mayor and the issue of the county attorney, thoughts on that? I mean, I'm going to go back to Bill because he's covered this stuff for so long.
The Shelby County Commission and the Shelby County Mayor have a dispute going over the county attorney's office and whether that office is objective, or whether, because the attorney is appointed by the mayor, that the attorney has some kind of bias, no matter who holds that particular position. So this ballot question is a result of that ongoing discussion and that ongoing dispute. Right now, the county mayor appoints the county attorney, and the county commission confirms that appointment. This would say, if for some reason the county mayor says, I want a new county attorney, this county attorney is fired, then under the terms of this, the county commission would have to agree to that firing, to that termination.
Does the county commission have its own? I should know this. Do they have their own attorney?
They do not.
In the way, because the Memphis City Council has its own attorney,
Yes.
and Strickland has city mayor has his own attorney, but the county does not.
The county does not, because the county charter is different according to the interpretation of past county attorneys, in saying that the county attorney is the only source of formal legal advice and representation for the Shelby County Commission and for county government.
Okay, all right. Well, and then the last unincorporated Shelby County wine at retail stores referendum. This was, can in the unincorporated areas, can those grocery stores sell wine? It was basically something that sort of fell through the cracks of the wine and grocery store law that was passed some years ago, or last year or two. Then in terms of the ballots, we won't go through all of them, but the state reps are up. The state senators, a portion of state senators are up. It's amazing to look at the ballot. You can go to shelbyvote.org or shelbyvote.com, or go to our site, maybe your sites too.
Right,
okay, so the ballot is out there and people should go. The number of unopposed candidates, I mean, it really has gotten to where the primaries are for so many of these positions. Mark Norris runs unopposed, Sarah Kyle runs unopposed. I mean, just so many people. It's really determined in the primary. But people should still vote. They should look at the candidates. They should look at the ballot. Let's move on to Beale Street and the Beale Street Authority. And I get confused by the different entities here every single time. But they have decided not to go to hire an outside management company. They're going to continue to have the Downtown Memphis Commission, formerly the Center City Commission, run the Beale Street Authority. What's behind that? May I turn to you, Bernard?
Of course, we are on Beale Street. We
right.
are a tenant of Beale Street, and so there's some sensitivity there, but we're there and to kind of understand it. And so one of the things that the merchants, Beale Street merchants, have said is that they've been, pleased with the current situation with the Downtown Memphis Commission. Essentially, though, the primary people that sort of manage and operate the street and sort of, it has really been the same group, at least for the 7 years that we've been there, which has, been the same team of the Beale Street, Beale Street management, and that includes John Shivers and Dan Glasper and Al and all and that same team. And so nothing has principally changed, at least in the past 7 years that we've been we've been there.
Some of the resistance to hiring this outside firm goes back to the kind of fraught relationship that people had with John Elkington, who ran. I mean, I think people probably, in some ways, don't give him enough credit for what, taking the Beale Street from what was nothing to really something as a world destination and a thriving district. But there were always questions about transparency, right, Bill? There were questions about where's the money going, and it seemed like some of that was behind the decision that we, the Beale Street Authority, aren't comfortable with any of these management companies who applied to be manager. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the major factors in this. For quite some time, there has kind of been this balance of power between Performa Entertainment and John Elkington and the Merchants Association. And it's no surprise, I don't think it's unique to this kind of setting, that you have that kind of tension, those issues that come up that get worked out. But the merchants, for the most part, were looking for someone who didn't rule with quite that much of an iron hand. And Elkington's standpoint was that he came in when the renovated district opened, so he needed to have that leeway to do that in order for the district to still be here all these years later. But the Tourism Development Authority got to the point where it had been talking with 21 Beale, a group of investors and leaders who have done entertainment, commercial real estate in Memphis as well as in Chicago. And so what happened was the merchants were uneasy with that. The authority, which was negotiating with 21 Beale, didn't feel like they were getting their questions answered about specific financial conditions. And 21 Beale felt like if we agree to the budget that's set by the authority and remain within that budget, why do we have to answer all these questions about what everyone is being paid and why they're hired? So this past week, the authority decided to basically say, we're going to end the negotiations and we're going to stick with the DMC running the district on an interim basis, which they've done for 2 years now.
Right. Okay.
And I think
Last
really,
thought on this.
with the 21 Beale group, I mean, I think we can't ignore the issue of race. They've asserted that that they are an African American majority firm and entity, which would be a significant change there. And that there was some uneasiness or unreadiness about that particular issue, and that continues to be. We have a new piece that comes out in our edition that comes out this week that really sort of addresses some of that from both sides.
Right.
And so that'll be interesting as that plays out in terms of what remedies or steps they take, because they essentially became the last man or last entity standing amongst those that actually bid on the opportunity, and so
through 2 rounds
right,
of an
through,
RFP
exactly.
process.
Right.
Exactly.
So. Let's move on. Claiborne Temple is the church. You wrote about this this week, and you all may have covered too. So we'll go around here. But Claiborne Temple is the church right next to if you've ever been to the FedEx Forum for a Grizzlies game concert, Tigers. It's a beautiful but has been boarded up church. There's some exploration of it. You want to briefly introduce that?
Yes, there's a group that has title to it that for the last year has not been renovating it, but has been getting it to the point where people could simply go in and see. And they're doing a different form of pre-vitalization for this century-old church that started off as an Episcopal church and ended up as an AME church and was a pivotal site and backdrop during the civil rights movement in this city.
Yeah. But, Toby, you cover this too this week?
Just a bit, only enough that I think it's interesting that, as you said, the process of redeveloping this thing is going to be interesting, that they're going to bring people in and kind of get your thoughts, bring artists in there rather than saying, we've got an idea, we're going to overlay it on top of this, get the community in there. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I just think it's a good thing. It's a step forward for a treasure in our community that had sort of gone under disrepair, but now they've sort of creatively engaged the community to figure out how to bring this back and bring this treasure where people in the community can really enjoy it.
Well, and it's in that area that is just, there's so much going on.
Absolutely.
I mean, you go, half a mile and the Harahan Bridge is open. So the Big River Crossing, the lights are on the bridge.
Yes.
If you haven't been out on the bridge, it's now open public. I got to do a media tour a few weeks ago. It's really just remarkable to walk across the Mississippi River and have a barge go under you, and it's a beautiful day and it's an incredible view. And I did not want to go fight the crowd, so I didn't see, but I heard it was packed. Right. And then there are all these trails across the way that are going to open up, and all the things. Back to Downtown Memphis Commission, you give them credit where credit is due to Paul Morris, the former head, and the current team there. The streetscape all just to the south of Claiborne, Temple that we just talked about. I mean, amazing stuff has happened down there. I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of apartments are going. It's pretty remarkable. Another opening, IKEA's opening. We're all excited, right?
IKEA apocalypse, somebody said yesterday. December 14th is going to be the opening day on the Big Blue building out there on Germantown Parkway. It's going to be massive on the inside. I did a construction tour just walking around. They were telling me where the showroom was going to be and where the meatballs were going to be. And it's going to be
people
huge.
Love these. If people are thinking that's a strange comment, it's a really,
is.
People who are fanatical about their meatballs. So.
Yes, but it's going to be just an economic powerhouse, I think, for Memphis. There have been some hiccups about construction and pilots and all that thing about that, but right. When it opens, you won't be able to get in there for 2 months.
Right,
so.
and we had a bit of we talked about last week with Joanne Massey, and who handles diversity and contracting and so on issues. We talked a little bit about some controversy about the use of minority and women-owned businesses by Linkus Construction, and you got an email from Rusty Linkus this week. You want to kind of quickly...
Who is the president of Linkus Construction, and he disputes those points that were made on this program and in the piece that we wrote about it. He says that Linkus Construction met all of the minority contracting goals it was required to under the EDGE process, and that Linkus Construction did not bend the rules to be considered a women-owned business.
All right, we'll leave it there. Correction, clarification. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Once again, next week.